All right, we all good? Ready to go, Tobin?
Sure.
Excellent. Welcome to another Town Hall Thursday. I am your host, Libertarian for Governor Darryl W. Perry, and I'm joined tonight by Tobin Menard, who is a Libertarian for State Rep in Sullivan District 9, which is Newport, Sunapee area. I don't remember all of your towns, but Tobin, thank you for joining.
Glad to be here.
And I guess we should get the super big news out right away and make sure that if people had not seen the WMUR stories, because certainly the union leader hasn't covered it, neither has the Keene Sentinel, although I do suspect that the Keene Sentinel will cover the story tomorrow. Don't know if or when the union leader will cover it, probably on Sunday, which is when they do their state political under the dome piece. The Libertarian Party is officially on the ballot for 2020. All of the candidates that filed their nomination paper or their intent to be a candidate papers back in June, because we have a really screwed up electoral process. So you have to file papers in June to say, I am petitioning or I intend to petition. And then you turn in all of your petitions to city and town clerks in early August. You collect them back later in August. And then you have to sort them by municipality, county, and congressional district, and then take them to the Secretary of State's office, who then verifies that you have enough signatures. So all of that, plus the 35% reduction that we got from the federal court, means that yesterday morning, Tobin, you, me, Robert Daniel, Justin O'Donnell, who's our Senate candidate, both of our congressional candidates, AJ Old, or U.S. House candidates, because U.S. Senate is one half of the Congress, Zachary Dumont and AJ Olding, Nicholas Sarwark and Richard Manzo, who are county level candidates in Hillsborough County, and several others went to the State House to turn in all of the petitions. And well, because everything is normal, according to the state's lawyer, they still have signs on the front door that says State House is closed. Please call this number if you need to gain entry. And so somebody called that number, said, we need to gain entry. We have a present for Secretary Gardner. And then the security guard said, all right, well, go to the side of the building. And so we all went to the side of the building. And then we were told, you don't get to come in. And then a couple of ladies from the secretary's office came down, took the petition, said, we'll look through these at some point today and then let you know if everything's good. So we got the official word yesterday afternoon. I think it was about 2:00 is when we found out that we are officially on the ballot, which means that we can now actually begin campaigning. So Tobin, I know you're in a state rep race that, again, it's multiple towns. How are things going in that part of the state that I haven't been to in quite some time?
Going pretty good. The incumbent that I'm up against is Linda Tanner. Oops. Apologies. And yeah, overall, this area, the COVID issue has not been much of an issue. We've had a few cases, but it has not hit us hard. So that's been nice. We're a low population area. To be honest, the whole reason that I got involved in running for this race was, again, the incumbent Linda Tanner had come out basically last year. She went to the high school in Newport to promote a tax on stock transfers. So if you bought or sold stocks, they were going to put a tax on it. They said it was only for the rich, but most of us have a 401k or some other investment.
Yeah,
And
so this sounds like sort of an expansion of the interest and dividend tax.
that was, yeah, that, I believe that was what it was. And she basically said this only applies to rich people like me. Now, Newport is a very blue collar town. Yeah, a lot of people work
Yes.
for Ruger's, the gun
Yep.
manufacturer. So when I heard that, it told me she was out of touch. And so that was when I decided that I needed to run against her and hopefully replace her.
And I'm assuming, but you know what they say about what happens when you assume. Have you signed the pledge?
Yes.
Excellent. And for anybody that's watching that isn't from New Hampshire, the pledge is something that started, I believe it was back in the 70s. And, well, there aren't very many people that get elected to major office. And by major, I mean state senate, executive council, or governor that don't sign the pledge. And the reason that I don't include and I'm not trying to diminish state reps at all, but we have 400 of them. So depending on the makeup of the district, it's very likely that there are going to be people get elected as state rep that haven't signed the pledge. But it's basically a statement saying, I will not vote for if governor, I will not sign into law a broad-based sales or income tax, because New Hampshireites hate taxes. And here's a direct quote from a former state rep who is no longer with us, when he was actually standing up supporting an increase in what is legally the road toll, i.e. the fuel tax. We have to call it the road toll because New Hampshireites hate taxes, but they're okay with tolls. So the income tax that does exist, and despite what some people want to say, there is an income tax. However, it's only on interest and dividend income over a certain amount. And I forget what that amount is. I know at one time it was 50,000. I forget if they increased that. There is a sales tax that applies to prepared foods and short-term lodging. And by short-term lodging, they mean hotel, Airbnb, bed and breakfast. So like if you rent a room or an apartment from somebody and you're on a month-to-month lease, that's not short-term. Short-term is less than 28 days. I know they were talking about trying to say less than 30, and then I reminded them that if somebody's on a month-to-month lease, they would have to pay the tax for the month of February because that's only 28 days, except every 4 years it's 29. And oh, right, that makes sense. So there are some taxes. I would love to see all of those go away. And Tobin, if you happen to get elected to the legislature, what sort of things would you first introduce?
Well, like you said, personally, if I had the authority, I would like to see a lot of the taxes go away and more go towards a usage fee. That would be a big improvement, I think. Allow people to pay for what they use, not pet projects that the legislature or other elected officials have.
But as you know, there's normally somewhere between 700 to 1,000 pieces of legislation filed every year. So any of the state reps can file legislation. Do you have plans to file any legislation, whether you think it would wind up getting passed or not?
I have not personally written up any legislation. So I'm kind of new to, this process. So it's
Yep.
a it's something I'm learning about as I go.
Yep. And since you're not too familiar with the process, most of the state reps that introduce bills don't write the bills themselves. They go to what's called OLS, the Office of Legislative Services, and they tell one of the bureaucrats that work in that office, hey, I've got an idea for a bill. I want to do X. Can you tell me if we already have something on the books kind of like that? And then OLS will, do some research, call them back and say, hey, as a matter of fact, there is a current statute that says this. Oh, well, can I tweak that to do this thing? And then OLS will prepare the copy for them and then get the legislator to sign off on it. So very few pieces of legislation are actually written by state reps. They're generally written by OLS, and the ones that aren't written by OLS are written by lobbyists, which I know that lobbyists tend to get a bad rap, but sometimes they can do good, like the ACLU, for instance. They have an arm that does lobbying, that they have helped expand voting rights. They've helped protect voting rights. Unfortunately, the current governor and the previous full legislature that was completely run by Republicans have undone some of the voting rights that got introduced. But there are some organizations that are lobbyists that actually, put forth some good ideas. And then there's what I find ironic, some model legislation put forth by some, I don't want to say progressive groups, because they tend to be groups made up entirely of legislators that happen to also be somewhat progressive. That's why I say I don't want to say progressive groups, but it's model legislation to ban the use of model legislation that's not created by legislators, if that makes any sense. So it's one of those things of, wait a second, you're doing that thing that you don't want done. So those are generally the ways that legislation comes in. So if you've got some ideas, you don't have to do all the research and flip through the binders that are however tall, trying to figure out where this thing is and how it might be tweaked. But before I go on with the questions that I have in my mind and the discussion, we do have a question in the Zoom. And if you're watching on Facebook, I don't monitor the Facebook. I do monitor the Zoom chat. So you can go to darrellwperry.com/Zoom. And I understand that for some people, based on whatever browser you're using, that URL doesn't actually take you to Zoom. I'm sorry. But you could, I guess, send questions to Town Hall Thursdays at darrellwperry.com, and then I'll see the question next week. But if you are in the Zoom, you can post your questions, and I will monitor that. About half the time, my wife monitors the Facebook for me. She's actually on emergency petition duty down in Rhode Island, because Rhode Island is the last of the 50 states, plus the District of Criminals, where we still need some petitions collected. Their deadline is tomorrow. So, all hands on deck, if you will. So she's out doing that, not able to monitor the Facebook. But question from Robert Daniel, who says, do road tolls count as a usage fee?
I would say that road tolls do count as a usage fee. That said, I don't believe they should be applied to other pet projects throughout the state. They should be strictly to maintain the road that you are using.
And I would go one step further, Tobin, to say that the road tolls that are collected on the road when you drive through a toll booth do count as a usage fee. The road toll that applies to fuel attempts to act as a usage fee, but it's really a regressive tax on people that can't afford energy efficient automobiles. So
agree.
just because somebody has, like a 1970 whatever Rabbit doesn't mean that they're using the road more than somebody that owns a Tesla. It's probably quite the opposite. But because they get worse gas mileage, they're paying more in that road toll that applies to fuel. So it attempts to be a usage fee, but as applied, it isn't actually a usage fee. And then, as you mentioned, there's all of these other pet projects where, oh, well, let's just take some of the money from here and then put it over into the fish and game budget because they really need to upgrade that rail trail in this particular park, and they need to do this. And oh, well, we've got excess money, we can send it over here. Oh, let's just put some of this in the general fund. And so then it does become sort of a catch-all, and well, that's why we need to increase it. What do you mean we should cut the budgets of some of these other things that have been relying on this tax? We can't do that.
Basically, right now, you got taxes on, say, or the toll on 93 pays for projects up in Pittsburgh, New Hampshire.
Yeah.
And how many people driving 93 from Manchester to Concord are going up to Pittsburgh every week or so?
Right. And not only that, but the tolls are also going to pay the glorified change counter that sits in the booth on the interstate. It's going to pay some pencil pushers that, are in effect middle management between, some appointed bureaucrat appointed by the current governor and the people that are the glorified change collectors. So, there's a lot of personnel cost that is in these road tolls that if you went to a system with automated arms, and not that I necessarily advocate using the Easy Pass, just because, there are legitimate privacy concerns about the Easy Pass. But at the same time, there are legitimate privacy concerns about me carrying this thing around in my pocket. And if anybody happened to have not looked at the screen, I held up my cell phone. But, if things went that way of more automated collection of the tolls, then you could eliminate a lot of that personnel cost. And that would save money. And then you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about the funds being diverted to wherever. You could actually probably decrease the tolls.
Yeah, for decades, you had the little basket as you drove through that you could toss change in.
Yeah. And then it would open up a little arm.
Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about, and I am not sure, first, do you have a website that people can go to learn more about your campaign?
I do. It's Tobin Menard. Hang on, let me pull it up. It's HTTPS.
Yeah, you don't need that.
Okay.
You don't need the www.
It's just TobinMenard.com.
All right, excellent. So when people go there, I'm guessing they will probably see some issues. What are your sort of top 2 or 3 issues that you're running on for state rep?
Well, my position, I have a position on abortion, Second Amendment, and smaller government.
All right. What do you want to see done? You said abortion first, so what would State Rep Tobin Menard want to do as it relates to abortion?
My biggest thing is I believe abortion, I'm a pro-life person, but I don't believe government should be involved. I think through education of options is the best way to reduce abortion. So, there are situations, whether rape or, different situations that the woman is, basically being abused the longer she carries the child. Being forced to carry the child is just wrong in that situation. Now, making sure that new parents know their options and what's available through nonprofits and other local programs so that they don't feel overwhelmed and get the financial and material help they need is a major factor that I believe would reduce abortions. But again, I don't think government is ever the right answer as a one solution catch-all for everything.
Yeah, there was a actually multiple time gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania that had a very similar position that he called it pro-option. So you're not telling people that you're going to go to jail for having an abortion. You're not threatening to arrest doctors if they perform one, but you're educating people about what their options are, letting mothers know, hey, adoption is an option if you don't want to keep the child but want to go that route. Letting people that want children that for whatever reason can't have them get connected with pregnant mothers or pregnant women that don't want to be mothers, so that they could sort of arrange the adoptions before the child's ever born. Is that kind of...
Yeah, something like that. And there's also a lot of programs out there that, because a lot of new parents, whether it's the mother or father, feel overwhelmed at the idea of having a child. And there's programs out there, whether it's, give parents a break, or there's financial help. There's, like I said, material help, whether in diapers or food, or, that a lot of, when you start looking at the expense of raising a child, especially a young one, it can be overwhelming.
Yes.
But when you know your options and you know that there's support out there, then you're more apt to raise that child and take care of it, or, as you said, put it up for adoption, so that child then grows up in a healthy environment and becomes a productive member of the society.
Got a question here from Robert about abortion that we'll get to before we discuss Second Amendment. He says, how would you feel about making first trimester abortions legal and third trimester abortions illegal?
I know there's a lot of discussion about science, about when, it's viable. And I mean, I personally, as I said, as a pro-life person, I believe that if it's viable, then it should be, if it's not through a case like rape or otherwise, then I would like to see it given the chance to grow.
Right. And I've seen explained numerous times, and of course, I don't have firsthand experience with this, but I've seen numerous people explain, if a woman has an abortion in the third trimester, chances are she has already started like preparing the baby's room. She has a crib, she's buying clothes, and then there is something that comes up that threatens the life of that unborn child. And that is why the vast majority of third trimester abortions happen.
Medical, if it's a medical issue, obviously you got to leave it to the doctor.
Right. I just said all of that to basically point out that from all of the information that I have heard, third trimester abortions are basically a red herring thrown out by people of, well, what about if a woman's at 40 weeks and she's going into labor? Should she be allowed to? And that doesn't happen. That particular scenario that you are describing doesn't happen. So I think we've covered that pretty well. And that is one of those, very touchy issues that a lot of times just winds up, causing people to scream back and forth at each other without actually hearing one another.
That was part of the reason I chose it, because I think too often people avoid, especially politicians,
Yep.
when they run for office, they avoid those touchy subjects as much as possible. And I think that the conversation needs to be had.
And there's also, and I guess we're not done discussing this, there's also, a lot of the federal court precedent that says states can't do X as it relates to abortion. So there's not really a lot that state legislatures can actually wind up legally doing. That doesn't stop the state legislators in Alabama from essentially trying to ban abortion, and then they wind up going into court. Well, they don't go to court. The state's lawyers go to court, and then the federal court says, you can't do that. You have to remove that from the books now. So, there's a lot of wasted time and money and energy as it relates to this, when there's not really a lot that can actually legally be done. And I know that neither one of us are running for federal office, but at the federal level, there's nothing that can be done, but people love still discussing it.
Yes, and I do think there are issues that I do think it's, the legislature's responsibility to challenge the federal law, on behalf of state rights. After all, we know that federal government has overstepped its bounds in many areas that should be the responsibility of states.
True. Now let's go on to Second Amendment, or as I prefer to cite, since we are running for state office, Part 1, Article 2A, which is, I realize, the same sort of acronym of 2A, but it's the state constitution's recognition of the right to bear arms in defense of themselves, their families, their property, and the state. So what's your position on the right to bear arms?
My position is that it's everybody's right to bear arms, and restrictions on it constitutionally are unconstitutional. I mean, if you look at it, they restrict different guns, but the fact is, even federally, if you had the money and were willing to apply for the certificates for storage of material and to buy the actual weapon, it's actually legal for an individual to purchase a nuclear weapon. It's ironic, and yet, many states have restrictions on how many bullets you can have.
Yeah. So, as we know, New Hampshire does not restrict how many bullets you can have. There are the federal prohibitions on so-called bump stocks that, ironically, groups like the NRA have not challenged. They're like, oh, well, that's not an infringement on the right to bear arms. That's an accessory to the arms. So where do you draw that distinction, or do you draw a distinction?
Well, I got issues with the NRA just simply because pretty much every gun restriction law that has been passed with their support. They say
Yes.
they're against, restriction, but really what they are against is not getting paid for the law before they support it.
Yes. Yeah, and also a couple of years ago, There was the gun owner in Minneapolis, I believe, that was killed by police, and the NRA was completely silent. There's a lot of speculation over why the NRA was completely silent in the death or murder of Philando Castile, who, when he was pulled over, told the police that he had a gun. He had a license to carry the gun, and they asked to see that and his driver's license. And when he went to grab his wallet out of his back pocket, one of the officers said, "He's reaching for his weapon," and then shot him in front of his girlfriend and small child. And of course, the NRA completely silent. A lot of speculation is they were silent because he was a black gun owner, and that's not really their target demographic, because didn't the NRA actually support a semi-automatic rifle ban in California when the Black Panthers showed up at the state capitol?
I believe they did.
Yeah. So, there probably are some racist origins within the NRA as far as how they began, and still a lot of lingering systemic racism within how they operate. I personally believe that there are much better gun rights organizations, and gun rights isn't actually the proper term because the gun itself does not have rights. It's the people that have the rights to own them. So anything else to add on Second Amendment? Oh, well, yeah, I actually got a question about this that just popped into my head because this is something that has come up in recent years at both the state. I don't know if the legislation has actually come up at the federal level, but so-called red flag laws, which are essentially depriving someone of their right to keep and bear arms without due process if they have any kind of cognitive impairment at all and someone calls the cops.
Red flag laws are unconstitutional, in my opinion. The fact is, if they are a threat and you can document it and you can show it, then the cops can make one phone call to a judge. They can get a warrant. They can get, they can go through the proper procedure in order to remove weapons from that person and have them get the help they need if there is an issue.
Yeah, and as we've actually seen all too often, a lot of times the welfare check calls end up without the welfare being checked upon, and instead the person ending up dead. So before you call police to check on your friend, your neighbor, your loved one, maybe think about calling Domino's. And I realize, that sounds kind of strange, but they literally will be there within 30 minutes. They will not shoot the dog. They won't shoot the cat. They won't shoot your friend, family, neighbor, loved one. They will go and attempt to deliver a pizza. And if there is no answer on the, at the house, okay, something's wrong. If there is an answer and they're kind of confused about, I didn't order a pizza. Oh, it's paid for? Okay, I guess I have a pizza now. But that's a much better first option in most cases than calling the cops.
Not to mention, if you're not in a good place, how can you not be happy about getting free food?
Yeah. Well, if you put anchovies on my pizza that you're giving me for free, I might be a little disgruntled, but I can pick them off, I guess.
Yeah.
Or I live in a bad neighborhood. There's always a bunch of homeless people that would love some free pizza. I could just give it to them. Question: have you ever eaten Domino's? The pizza, I've never eaten the actual the toy that is called Domino's. I don't recommend doing that unless you make them out of cookies. Like you could do frosting on cookies to make your cookies look like dominoes. Let's go to, and this is a very broad category here, probably intentionally so, smaller government. So you're talking about just, let's reduce the state budget by a penny and now it's smaller. Or do you mean something much broader than that?
Well, I would say more broader. I mean, I'd like to see the budget shrink. That way our taxes go down, especially on property and whatnot. But the fact is, whether it's federal or state governments, they've exceeded what the Constitution, either federal Constitution or state Constitution, have given them as their rights and their responsibilities. So I would like to see us return responsibility from the state, in this case, back to the towns and individuals.
All right, so let me ask this question. And we probably agree somewhat on this, but there is going to be some minutia here. And hopefully I'm able to articulate it clear enough to where it makes sense. As you know, New Hampshire is not a home rule state, meaning that, local municipalities can't do just whatever they want to. There are limits to some extent on what a municipal, government can do, whether it be a city through their city council, a town board of selectmen, or the voters in a town meeting. So there are some limits, but at the same time, we're seeing where, what was it, Portsmouth, Dover, I think, Keene, Manchester is supposed to be voting on this sometime soon, a mask mandate of, everybody, if they're in public, they have to wear a mask, and if they don't, they could be fined up to $1,000. I don't want your opinions necessarily on whether it's smart to wear a mask, not smart to wear a mask, whether there should be, municipal ordinances. But do you think that home rule should be, or the limits that exist on not home rule? And again, I realize that the wording here is a little strange. Do you think that that should be protected a little bit so that you can't have these municipalities that are setting their own rules on certain behavior that are drastically different from neighboring towns, and then there's not at the state level just here's the minimum threshold of what is acceptable on this? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Or do you want me to give a couple more examples?
No, basically what it comes down to is, in my personal opinion, property rights. Okay? So the 5th and 14th Amendment, they basically refer to common law for much of this. And yes, any business can set the standard, and many have already, on coming into their facility. It's private property.
Yep.
You get to set the standard of who comes into your home. And if I want to come visit you, if you say I have to wear a tutu to come into your house, I've got to put a tutu on if I want to come in your house. Otherwise, I got to choose not to come in.
Right, but we're not talking about private individuals here. We're talking about, so like a couple years ago, the city of Dover passed an ordinance saying we're not letting any business sell tobacco to anyone over the age of 21, even though state law is 18. City of Keene did something similar. So do you think that there should be, not just on the sale of tobacco, but just across the board where the state says you cannot place more restrictions than what the state has done. If you want to, city of Portsmouth, say that you're not going to have your police department enforce drug laws, that's fine, but you can't say Tylenol is now prohibited by anyone under the age of 21.
Well, I don't believe, these restrictions. I mean, if you're an adult, you need to be treated as an adult. So if you're going to raise the age for, whether it's drinking or tobacco or anything else to 21, that means that you shouldn't be able to charge anybody under 21 as an adult for any offense that they have. Because if you don't feel they can make adult decisions, then obviously they're not an adult.
Okay, and that's not exactly where I was, trying to get the discussion to go. But, as a gubernatorial candidate, I do think that there should be, some limits set on what municipalities can do, to where you can't have the city of Manchester say it's illegal to be homeless. Like, homeless people have a right to exist. You shouldn't just be arrested for being homeless. Now, I realize that in a lot of ways they get around this by having curfews that apply to city parks, which I don't think they should be able to have a curfew that applies to a city park, because again, that is public property. We can, discuss at a later time whether public property should exist. I know some libertarians say that it shouldn't. Other libertarians say, there should be some, agreed upon common areas that, just exist. Like, you shouldn't be able to homestead a circle around my house to prevent me from going to buy groceries. So that's just like a very niche philosophical discussion. But if there are common areas such as Veterans Park, the city of Manchester should not be allowed to kick people out for being there after 11 o'clock at night. They shouldn't be able to kick people out for being there for more than 2 hours during the middle of the day, which is how they get around the, oh no, we're not banning homelessness. We're just not letting anybody exist in public for more than 2 hours at a time. So does that explain the question a little bit more of should there be the limits on what cities and towns can do?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly should be limitations. Like you said, you shouldn't be able to target certain populations simply because they exist.
Right.
And
as Part 1, Article 10 states, that has been called the right of revolution. That wording not actually in what was adopted in 1784, but it says that government being instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the whole community, and not for the private interest or emolument of any one man, family, or class of men. Therefore, whenever the ends of government are perverted and public liberty manifestly endangered and other means of redress are ineffectual, the public may, or rather the people may, and of right, ought to reform the old or establish a new government. The doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive of the good and happiness of mankind. So even our state constitution says what you just said, of you can't have these rules that apply to one, class of men, if you will, but yet there are all kinds of rules that apply to particular classes of men, but because they haven't been challenged within the appropriate amount of time, we can't now just go challenge and say all zoning laws are horrible because it prevents me from, having 3 apartments inside my single family dwelling, because some years ago this was deemed to be single family, and 2 extra apartments is not single family. I think you were about to say something, and I unfortunately very rudely cut you off. So if you've got a thought, go ahead with it.
No, I had a thought and it kind of slipped away.
Okay.
But I think you kind of covered stuff pretty good.
Yeah, that happens to me as well, probably because of too many dings to the head. So I generally go 30 to 60 minutes on this. We're at 45-ish minutes right now. So if there's anything that you definitely want to cover, go ahead and bring it up. We can discuss.
I don't have anything, extra. I think we covered our big issues. And like you said, I actually talked more than I expected.
Excellent. Oh, and since we did mention pizza earlier, and I know that this is a very controversial topic here, pineapple on pizza.
My wife likes it, so therefore I will support it.
I'm not asking whether you think it should be legal or not. You can put whatever disgusting ingredients you want on your pizza. Just, do you personally like pineapple on your pizza?
No, I do not. Yeah, I'm more of a simple hamburger and mushroom guy, or a meat guy. But
I'll tell you what is really good. It's a very odd combination that you have to specially order. It's not something that you're just going to see on the menu. If you do Alfredo sauce instead of marinara, ham, and feta, it is really good. It's only good hot. It's loses a little bit of something after it sits there for a couple of hours and you have to nuke it. But that is just, it's a really good, unique combination that, again, you're not seeing on the menu. But that is, if Darryl is ordering a special pizza and it's not a barbecue cheeseburger, then I'm doing that Alfredo with ham and feta. All right, excellent. So Tobin, again, the website for you is tobinmenard.com. And I see down at the bottom, you have a donate now button. You also have a telephone number at the top that I am assuming is your telephone number, that if somebody wants to volunteer to help you out in some kind of way, they can give that number ring-a-ding-ding, and you hopefully will answer, or they'll leave a voice message and then you call them back. You also have events on your page. I see that you've got a Libertarian Party meetup happening at the end of September. Is that still happening?
It's kind of died down with the COVID stuff going on. So the last meeting I didn't make it up to. I know the place that it occurs is open.
Okay.
So, but I have not made it up there to confirm that other people are going.
Yeah, and that's the reason, because of COVID. That's why I asked if that's still happening, because I know that all of the events except one that I was planning to attend have been completely canceled. I don't believe the regular meetups in Manchester are currently happening, just because of limits on everybody's got to socially distance inside the restaurant, which then makes having a group rather difficult. The one event that has not been canceled, it was just delayed by 3-ish months, is Queen City Pride, that is happening next weekend, September 12th. I will be there, wearing a mask, of course, being responsible, attempting to socially distance at the table with others, because I don't want to get people sick. It's not that I worry so much about myself getting sick. I'm more concerned about other people getting sick, and I don't want to be an asymptomatic carrier. So again, Tobin Menard's website, tobinmenard.com, my website, darrylwperry.com. And if you have not yet requested your absentee ballot for the November election, you can do that. Click the request absentee ballot thing right on the front page of my website. It takes you to the forms and all of the information. If you need help filling out the forms, who does it go to, etc., things like that. All of that documentation is there at darrylwperry.com/vote. And again, darrylwperry.com, tobinmenard.com. And you can, if you feel like sending a text and seeing what happens, text the word Perry, which is my last name, Perry, to 77948. Text Perry to 77948. And remember, next week, the 10th, I have Spike Cohen, the Libertarian Party's vice presidential nominee. He is on the town hall. He was originally scheduled for a few weeks ago, had some touring conflict where he wound up going on a bus tour similar to how Dr. Joe Jorgensen did, and he was in Flint, Michigan, giving a speech at the time. So found that out a few days prior. Hey, wait a second, they set up this tour. I need to make sure what's going on there and reschedule. So Spike Cohen next week. And then after that, I'm still working out who's coming on when. Trying to book a guest for the 17th. I already have Matt Simon from the Marijuana Policy Project scheduled for the 24th. And again, I do these every Thursday at 6 o'clock. Every Thursday, that is, through the end of October at 6 o'clock. DarrylWperry.com is the website. Have a good night. I'll see you next week.
Hey, Darryl, I'd like to remind everybody that's concerned about voter fraud, the best way to counter it is to actually go out and vote.
Yes.